This is Two on One, the internet's top sensation, where we dive into the 90s and consider theology, pop culture, and what it means to be a virgin who can't drive. I am your co-host, the Reverend Arthur Stewart.
Oh, that was way harsh, Ty. I'm your other co-host, Reverend Stephanie Kendall. And Arthur, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you. So we're doing Clueless today. I'm sorry, usually like we dance around the topic. We're doing Clueless today. I watched this movie with my husband and my daughter, who is 11, and my daughter loved it.
Yeah, because it's amazing.
Because it's amazing. And it just gave me flashbacks, and this was very much my generation without me realizing it was very much my generation.
Cher Horowitz has absolutely influenced not only my understanding of like clothing and clearly all sorts of things, but it's a movie that I love. It is a cast of characters that I love, and also as I watched it this week as well, it was like, oh, there's some things that we have to discuss. It has some problematic spaces in which we can hold tenderly. So,
well, woman, I think never mind. Donald Faison always makes me happy, and
I do too. Well, we're going to talk about him because Murray is such a uniquely wonderful character. But I've asked you repeatedly not to call me woman. So there is that. I mean, our deuces, you're just gonna get an earful of quotes today, my friends.
Well, certainly a fat PHAT earful. I say that because I'm totally kind of a bald one. Anyways, we have a great show for you today. Our dear friend Jason Cook is joining us to talk Clueless and clothes and fashion. And as we talk about clothes and fashion, you know, what one wears matters. I always mistake Legally Blonde and Clueless in some parts, and because it's like there's some overlap there. But what they do say is that the way one dresses and presents oneself is important because it makes a statement, whether you mean to or not. I bring this up because we are sponsored by Jeff Wunrow Designs. Jeff Wunrow Designs is celebrating 17 years of making ordinary time extraordinary through the purveyance, creation, design, and sending of liturgical textiles, including paraments, banners, frontals, altar accessories, stoles, face masks, and let's say yacht sails. Like they could totally make a sail for your yacht if you custom ordered it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we need a little Jeff Wunrow like bow tie up in here and all sorts of things. But I mean, you know that I love my Jeff Wunrow stoles. I am someone who I'm an Enneagram 3, as we all know. I like to put things on. I like my clothes to say something about me. And Jeff helps me say things about my theology that I may not want to or have the time to even say out loud. Or, you know, maybe I'm into there's something that I'm doing in which I want to make sure those who do not know me know where I stand on Black Lives Matter, Queer Lives Matter, or anything like that. And Jeff Stoles helped me talk about my theology without using words. And sometimes that's really helpful because sometimes just how you show up, your ministry of presence, is such a powerful space in which we can be an ally, in which we can talk about the things that matter to us, how we see the call of the gospel to be at work in our lives. And I've just always really appreciated that Jeff has helped me in my ministry of presence for lots of people.
Jeff Wunrow designed liturgical textiles are not Monet's. They don't look okay from far away, but up close, they're a mess. They're instead meticulously handcrafted and marvelously, beautifully and fearfully made. And they inform your ministry. You can go to jeffwunrow.com, JEFFWUNROW.com to check out the entire catalog of stoles, both elder and diaconal, paraments, frontals, banners, miters, chasubles, copes, you name it, they can do it.
Customizations, all the things.
So it is possible and it is good. After the show, go to Jeff Wunrow, JEFFWUNROW.com and use our code at checkout, 2on115. 2on1 is letters, 15 is numbers. If it doesn't work, drop them a line because it is 15% off your entire stole purchase.
And we only say that because we have had people who are like, we used the 201 code and something went wrong. Can you help us? And we are happy to help. Jeff is happy to help. It should work just fine, deuces.
Absolutely. It should work just fine, and it is good. We are thankful very much for Jeff 10 Designs on our show. I've just given Jason a 30-second warning, so really fast. This week, you are flying to Kansas.
Stop. Nope, this will come out after.
You're right. Sorry.
Just go into
All right, well, let's bring in our guest. And I'm going to hit admit and hope that it works. I think it should. Oh, yep.
Tell Jeff if it doesn't.
Jason Cook, welcome to 2-on-1. We are so glad that you're with us today. Thank you for coming on.
I am thrilled to be here with both of you today.
We are so happy to have you. Jason, we got to know you a little bit ahead of time, but we hope that you will at this point introduce yourself. Tell our deuces who you are, what you do, anything you want to share with them, how they can follow you and support you, but also why Clueless? Why do you like Clueless?
The big question, right?
The big question. I mean, it's
the
the
big question. Yeah. Well, let's see. Well, I guess to introduce myself, I have 2 lives, probably more than 2, but 2 that most people are aware of. One is I am a Unitarian Universalist minister. I serve the congregation in Fullerton, California, and I've been with those folks for about 6 years, and they're a wonderful group of people, and they do so much good work in the community. And then my little side gig is I am an actor in the area as well. So I just got out of a production of Clue. On Melrose Boulevard in Los Angeles. I played Wadsworth the butler. So I'm a little tired today. It's because I'm still recovering from running around the stage for that crazy, crazy show. But so much fun. So that's one reason that I'm connected to Clueless. Just to start with, is I just played in Clue, and then I opened in as Brick in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof at Long Beach Playhouse this weekend. So
well, that's amazing.
Week for me. Yeah.
Congrats! I know Long Beach Jason and I were getting to know each other a little bit and sharing our California roots, and I know Long Beach Playhouse well. I know the theater on Melrose that you were at as well. Nice. And last week's episode of 2-on-1 was on Clue, so all the ties.
That's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. But as far as Clueless goes, I have a special relationship with Clueless because I am old enough to have seen this film in the theater. Not only did I see it in the movie theater, but I think I had a quintessential experience for seeing this particular film, because I was on one of my first dates ever with another guy. We went to the Beverly Center, which couldn't be anymore. I don't think it's in Clueless, but it should be.
It should be.
West Side Pavilion's in Clueless, but Beverly Center should be there, right?
That's a whole other, and this is going to be very niche references for those of us that are from LA. But same, when she was like, I just needed to go, and all of a sudden I forgot that they went to the West Side Pavilion. I was like, never in a million years would these Beverly Hill girls now go to that.
No, that's so wrong, right? I mean,
wrong.
With every detail being right, it's like, no, they wouldn't have been at West Side Pavilion. It would have been at the Beverly Center. But anyway, only those.
Again, what a weird and niche thing that you and I both absolutely picked up on and noticed.
Yeah, exactly. And don't mean to leave anybody out who's not familiar with that area.
No.
But at the time, the Beverly Center was sort of the center for mall culture for kids of that age in Beverly Hills. So I was just a couple years older than Cher. And I'm on this date and no idea what this movie's about. Just had heard a little bit of buzz and knew it was an updating of Jane Austen, which at the time did not sound particularly appealing to me, though I am a huge Austen fan now. But went to see it and just loved it. Fell in love with it because it just had such a sweet spirit to it. Despite it being about what I thought was going to be about snotty rich kids in Beverly Hills, it was actually just so there was a kindness of spirit at the heart of it that just moved me. And I don't remember the date. That guy, who knows where he went, but the movie has stayed as something that I am connected to all these years later.
I love that. I love that so much. I too saw it in the theaters, though I was younger. I was in 7th grade, but if you can imagine 7th grade me just watch, I mean, it opens with, I know what you're thinking, right? This looks like a Noxzema commercial. And I was like, it does. And I love that. And then, Cher's swooping through her closet, and it's still like one of my life goals is just to have one of those touch screen outfit generators of all the clothes in my closet.
But did it not bother everyone here that she clearly picked a mismatch? Like she needed the computer to tell her that?
I don't believe in mismatched clothes, so. But that's a whole other thing. No, but I think it was permissive in a way that says, like, you get to stand out, you get to be you, which I really appreciated. Arthur, what was your relationship to Clueless?
This was one of those like where the clearly gay theater kids all like watched it for movie night, but like we did so secretly. Because I will say this, like I struggle no longer with the term chick flick or chicklet. I don't think those things exist. I think it's a misnomer and I think it's inappropriate. And there's a difference between a target demographic and a dismissive descriptor. But it was absolutely, when I was in my teen years, a quote chick flick that wrestling with what it meant to appreciate it. But I do think I love camp, and I want to talk about the campiness in it because actually that's the first question. Like there's a campiness, if I can just throw this out there, like, yep, and I'm doing it. I'm gonna run the stop sign. It's campiness.
She's totally paused.
Campiness to Clueless because it's creating a world in which there's rules that aren't the real world's rules that they point at very clearly and say, look, this is obviously not the real world, but we're going to function within it. And it's part of it is the retelling Jane Austen, and part of it is the satire of the wealth and glitz of Beverly Hills. Does the church have an obligation to be campy in that regards? Do we need to intentionally point to the world that we inhabit when we come together as church to say, we know this is wacky, like we know this is campy, and we invite you to participate anyway?
Ooh.
That's a great question. And I think what I see the movie so successfully doing is it does skewer those things you're talking about, but it's so smart in the way that it does it. Sometimes camp is unintentional. And we certainly know great bad movies that we all love to watch, kind of hate watch even. But the idea that you can look at the world through the lens of humor and maybe point out what needs to be changed, but do it with that humor and that that little touch of being over the top, I think that can really resonate with people. There's I made a list as I went through the movie again, how many things are referenced, from environmental issues to the Amnesty International t-shirts and all these different things that are in there, but it doesn't club you over the head with that because it's done with such a fun spirit. So I think in our faith communities, that can really be a way to reach people, because sometimes they come in so fatigued from trying to carry the weight of the world. There can be a lightness of spirit that we bring to some of these topics, or just even the way that we look at the world itself.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah. Well, and I agree. I think, Arthur, you named it, that like the responsibility, I think, comes with being faithful to the text, or the Bible, the community, like of everything that we have. And there's just camp in it, right? To say that it's not a little bit ridiculous sometimes is to be unfaithful to or untrue to what is actually happening, right? There are stories about of all the things that if we skip over, I think what Jason I heard you say, or what I was kind of taking, is like, then we do get into those spaces in which it's a little bit more dire, that we bring weight to it and only weight to it, and the levity can actually kind of bring more depth and nuance to the work that we are called to do when we say, hey, look at this, is a little bit ridiculous, but it's also just fun, and it is okay for church to be fun, and it is okay for silly sayings and stories to come up in our worship experiences or communal life, and to name that as part of the work of God, however you define God, as well. That it isn't just like the dirges, it isn't just us coming together to lament and pray and it's that, but it's also self-expression and wardrobe. It's also the silly texts, the poop jokes that are in the Bible, and the I don't know, all the things.
Okay, there's the Emmaus rule that Mark Winters
Mhm.
pointed out to me once, friend of the show, Mark Winters, who did Mary Poppins with us. On the road to Emmaus, the two folks are walking and Jesus comes up to them and they don't know it's the risen Christ. And they're like, do you not know what's happened? And the risen Christ is like, no, tell me what has happened. And there's like 8 layers of irony in what he says in that. I mean, if you've ever read Jonah, ever, like, the whole thing is a spoof. It's meant to be, but it also has value in spoofing, and it has value in that campiness. And I think we agree on that. There's an invitation to a world that can have lightness, and in that lightness there, and I mean weight wise, it can feel light even if it is heavy, and when it is dire.
That I love that, and it reminds me early on when Cher she has to do that oral report, and it's on immigration, and she's mispronouncing Haitians in that.
Avians.
And I'm thinking, as I'm watching the film again, like, oh, how is this going to land? And what she's doing is, she's got this kind of retelling. It's a loaves and fishes story that she's telling there, but it's about some ridiculous Beverly Hills dinner party where she was able to, pull stuff together in the kitchen and feed everybody. But there, when I was thinking about that in terms of sort of the depth of the story, that it's actually the story about that there can be enough for everybody as long as we're willing to. I think she says if the governments would adjust or whatever. I mean, she's really right, she's actually really on to something there, but it's presented in this way that's campy and, supposedly from this person who's kind of got a bit of an airhead quality, but it's actually really profound, that if we all just learn to share and adjust what we have, we could, there would be enough for everybody. I think that's really the way she proceeds in the whole movie, right? She tries to make sure there's enough for everybody.
May I please remind you that it does not say RSVP on the Statue of Liberty?
No, and some people lost everything. Don't you think that includes athletic equipment?
Exactly.
I mean, this falls into the genre of the coming of age story. It's a teen comedy, but it's about a person growing up. My favorite line in all of it was, and I wrote it down, it's like that book I read in the 9th grade that said, "'Tis a far, far better thing doing stuff for other people." How I see, I think the church has an obligation to encourage people to mature in the practice of their faith. I've seen congregations, and I'm excited that you are our first formal Unitarian Universalist on this program because it's a wider spectrum. I've seen congregations in my limited worldview that think if we do the rote stuff and if we do the right rituals, so to speak, on Sunday, that's good. And it can never change, and it doesn't have to expand, and it doesn't have to be different because this is important now, therefore it's important later. And this whole story is about Cher growing up just a little bit and transforming. How do we what does transformation look like in your context? But how do we encourage this? It is a far, far better thing to do stuff for other people.
Well, I was as I was watching again, I was remarking to myself on the fact that here Cher is trying to help other people, but not actually consulting or collaborating with the people she's trying to help. She's sort of deciding what they need and then bringing those things to them with, a wide spectrum of results that come out of that. And I feel like that's so often what happens in faith communities is we get very, insular, and we think we know what might help another group of people, and we just so try to create that, and it's not actually what they need, and they might actually be out there doing they might actually already have organizations. They might not actually already be doing that action that they need to help themselves. And we could come in and support that, but we haven't even taken the time to build those relationships. So for me, it's about just getting out beyond the church walls, building those relationships so that we actually know what people are asking for rather than deciding, like Cher, that we kind of have all the answers and we're going to, match this person with the group and we're going to make it all happen. Very, very well intentioned, but missing the mark more often than not.
You mean you don't want to send a bus full of high school kids to go re-roof a neighborhood?
Oh, that's a whole other.
We all have youth ministry stories that I was busy dealing with something, but I heard you guys in the pre-meeting. I heard you guys. But yes, it's mission to versus mission with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, again, we do the church a real disservice when we are so narrow in the scope of who we serve and who we are, that we forget that, we've only made space at the lunch table for, the approved group of friends, rather than, well, the burnouts sit over on the grassy knoll, and these are the only respectable boys. If you're going to date a guy in high school, here are the only respectable ones. And unless if you drive a BMW, you can't go over there. And as they were walking and having that conversation, I was very much like, oh, this is what it looks like if you are church shopping right now. If you are driving down the street and all of a sudden you're like, okay, if you're someone that is new to the faith or just curious about what a life in beloved community might look like, and if you're looking at just the churches you drive by, how do you know what group that you are okay to be a part of? And I think Ty does a really interesting thing of navigating all of those spaces. She tries them out and says this doesn't work, and I'm curious if part of our responsibility as faith leaders, or even just as people of faith, is that transparency in who we are, which I would make the case, yes, I do believe that is, but also how do we help people say it is okay to try something new without us feeling hurt, right? There isn't, because Ty goes and is hanging out with the skaters in one space and then another, right? How do we posture ourselves kind of like Sharon, say like, it's great that she has these new friends, right? That we expand and say, we may not be the right table for you, but there's a table over there and there is a table for everyone. I don't know if there was a question there other than like, I guess, yeah, how do we get, I guess, ego out of our own way in which to help others find the right fit?
That's a great question, because I think so often we set it up as we should be the fit for everybody.
Yeah.
And while I think that there are things that we can actively do to be more inclusive, to make connections with the ties in our world that maybe aren't the folks that we normally have right in our immediate circle, it doesn't necessarily mean that we certainly don't bring Ty in and change Ty to fit within our community. And the question becomes, how can our community create a relationship with other communities so that people don't have to feel like they're siloed, I guess, is the thing that I think is important.
And I think you actually just helped me like pinpoint something in my own head and in my own watching of this that I hadn't picked up on until literally this minute. Although I think in the background maybe I did, but the chair, with her best of intentions, does very intentionally make over Ty and say,
Right.
This is how you have to look in our space. Right. And I think we often do that. And we also see it does not work. Ty ends up where Ty is supposed to be.
But Ty also is made the monster that overtakes those good intentions. Ty becomes the center of the clique.
Well, that's true.
So like she becomes exactly what it is, but she then pushes out the leadership in there, and that also permeates a crisis. I thought that was one of the more congregationally things in there. I hate to say it, but like when you're successful in making people fit a mold, they fit a mold.
Well, I mean, we have systems, right? And
Mhm.
when there's an opening in the system, someone will fill that, and the system tends to be stronger than even an individual's will, so to speak. So you have to be really careful to make sure you have healthy systems, because you're going to, you can have some really wonderful, loving, well-intentioned person that comes to the community, but if your system is unhealthy, once that space opens up, that person may move into that role of being the antagonist or whatever it might be. And I think we only have ourselves to blame when that happens, if we're in these unhealthy systems, right? We're perpetuating
1000%.
that.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think what we don't, for all of their really clear and beautiful communication at an age level that's far above what is expected, right? This is a really smart school. They don't communicate as clearly or as often as they should, especially around their own hurt and trauma, right? There's a lot of this back ending, like Cher doesn't realize that she even remotely thinks about Josh in that way until Ty likes Josh, right? Like there's lots of the unspokenness that happens in community that we see manifest, the products of that we see manifest in different ways, for better or for worse. And so how do we take the expectation of clear communication, especially if you think you are communicating clearly, right? It's a really good school. We know how to talk, we know how to process things, and yet you still hold on to some of the hurt and the pain without naming it, so that it then shows up elsewhere, and you end up hurting your friends, and you end up hurting people that you really do care about, both intentionally and unintentionally. And I think that is a space right now where the church is so often. We have such a great opportunity in this moment to say, hey, the church is in a lot of harm, but where we are called to go, what we are called to do, this justice, leading life that follows a gospel, can absolutely, can be liberating. And here, join us, but bring your gifts as they are. Let's not try and change you immediately.
Yeah, that's what the UU Church is really trying very hard right now to do, because we recognize that as open and progressive as we've portrayed ourselves over the years, we've also appealed to a very educated, typically very white, upper middle class, upper middle class demographic. And that permeates our culture. I mean, just as much as Cher's culture has its own language, its own rituals, its own way of, dressing, all of that, we do that too in our open, affirming congregations. You come, you look around, and you go, oh, this is the way I'm supposed to dress. This is how I'm supposed to talk. These are the things I can talk about. And these are the things that maybe I shouldn't talk about in our small ministry groups, because it makes people uncomfortable. Just all that sort of thing. I know as minister, I have people come to me all the time, and behind closed doors, and say, they'll tell me their political affiliation, or maybe their, something about their marital status. It's something that they don't feel comfortable letting the wider community know. And that just tells me that we have just as many unspoken rules and cliques and so on, and as any, teen group, any teen high school does, like in this movie.
And forgive me for my silence the last few minutes. I did want to ask, because we kind of talked about it with the upper middle class white thing that happens in the church. Can we talk about Dion for a moment, if we have not already? And also, please remind me what Donald Faison's character's name is. It's
Murray.
Murray.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me, and I like it, because it was a movie made in the 90s and people were not so intentional. But there is a, I'm not sure how to broach this without putting my foot in my mouth. There's an intentional blackness in this movie, which I really like. Like, these characters were written to be not white, but there was also like, there's a line of stereotype that absolutely gets trod all over, and it goes back and forth. How do we deal with that in a movie made 25 years ago? God, is it 22 years ago? Wait, no.
95.
It's longer than that.
Yeah, 95.
27.
Yeah.
I met somebody who said they were born in 1999 and they were buying beer, and I hate it. Sorry,
Yeah.
I hate it.
Oh, you just can't think about these things too much.
True.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was pleasantly surprised watching the movie today through today's lens and seeing those characters, because we sometimes when we're watching movies, especially from the 80s, early 90s, mid 90s even, we either see no representation of any kind of racial diversity, or when we see it, it's the center of the story that it's traumatic. It's the same thing happens with LGBTQ characters from this era, and in both cases with the Christian character and with the Dion character and Murray, you have some stereotypes and so on being played with, but at the same time they emerge as real people. And they also have certain heroic qualities that I think that celebration of those folks is very welcome in a movie from this era.
Christian
Yeah.
White beat up those two guys at the mall, period. He wasn't going to be hate crimed. He wasn't going to run up and go like that. Like he was a more complex character who, sorry. I just love that. Do you think the Rat Pack needs another member now that Sam died? It's a good line.
It is a good line. I mean, that was one of the things that I, as I rewatched it too, that how diverse it is as a casting choice and intentional casting choices. And as someone who lived in that area, like, it's not as diverse in real life, right? It's like, yes, or at least in my experience at that time, this is a really good kind of microcosm of how it should be, how we should all be in community together. There were nuances of language and linguistics and relationships. There is lack of knowledge around thing, right? It's when they name that Christian is gay, they use all sorts of kind of like roundabout slurs, for lack of a better term, with, I don't know if it's, I mean, I think it's rooted in homophobia, but it also wasn't in a space that felt malicious, if that makes sense. But also, I'm not a queer person, so please correct me if that feels differently in your experience. But Murray has this really great line that I really appreciate early on, in which he continues to call Dion woman, and she goes, "Stop calling me woman." Stop. And he goes, I'm sorry, Miss Dion, but like, and then goes on to say, like, in these, colloquialisms and street terms, there is meaning, and they do carry sexism, but not necessarily misogyny. And I don't mean it with that intention. And he just, like, right off the gate is just like, here is the nuance between language and culture and people and experience that was really helpful. And I was like, 95, look at you go. Like, what? Look at how far we have not come. And yet there are still definite spaces of growth for all of these characters, in which that just wouldn't happen in today's film industry. It definitely still happens in today's lived experiences.
The line about Christian was, your friend Christian is a cake boy. He's a disco dancing, all Oscar Wilde reading, Streisand ticket holding friend of Dorothy. You know what I'm saying. I love that line personally. But I also love disco, Oscar Wilde.
I was like, none of it sounds bad. It's all like, yes, those things are amazing.
Yeah, like, well, I mean, I've introduced myself as a friend of Dorothy. Like that is a, I know insider language and I'm using it appropriately. Or I took it as an indication of, it's fine of who he is. But Jason, what do you think? I'm talking.
Well, as someone who saw it at the time, it definitely, the whole sensibility of it resonated with, gay culture at the time, especially, right there in that particular location that I was living in, that, sharing with that film. So, one of the things we have to remember when we're watching a movie from, X number of years ago, 27 years ago, is that how rare representation was. Really, really rare. So at that point, I think you have, a few movies maybe where, where gay people die of tragic deaths, you just have very few positive representation. And so something done with humor where the character, like I said before, has some heroic traits and doesn't die, it was just like, catnip. It was just, so welcome. And that was the kind of thing we would call our friends about at the time, and say, hey, there's this movie and it's got, there's a gay character in it, and it's really funny and whatever. I mean, we really lived for that. So in my head, the Christian character takes up more space in the story than it did when I was rewatching it in anticipation of talking with the two of you. So I have seen, the movie over the years, but I kind of remembered, because it was a big deal, that there was a character who was, gay and not tragic ultimately in that story.
So actually, I want to ask a question, because it came up last week when we talked to Alan Harris about Clue, and you've just finished a run of Clue, because there was technically in Clue gay representation in the film with Michael McKean, Mr. being blackmailed for ostensibly being a homosexual. And then it comes, the last line of the film and perhaps the play was, "I'm going home to sleep with my wife."
Right.
There's a bait and switch in that. How do we, first of all, is it still in the play today? Is it still a sub theme? And secondly, how do we deal with, what does it mean that like the gay character didn't get murdered by the axe murderer first and therefore it's a victory? How do we deal with representation as default as opposed to representation with intention?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, the Clue play, so it does end with a line about, "I'm going home to sleep with my wife," but our wonderful straight ally actor of his own accord said, "I'm going home to sleep with my husband." So and during our performances, so that was his choice. He did that, and I think that was a great call, because the character ultimately is really, if there's a hero in Clue, in that farcical story, it is that character. And keeping him gay, I think, took out that little vestige of homophobia that was there from the original film. But yeah, what was the second part of your question? Sorry, I got caught up in Clue.
What does it mean, both in film but really in the church, for representation to be default as opposed to intentional? That is to say, Christian's character was, I agree with you, was almost landmark in the 90s of here's a gay character with depth who's not a moral lesson nor a body. What do you do with the church, whatever the demographic may be of those who aren't within the normative curve of the congregation, to be decisively inclusive without patronizingly intentional?
That's such an important thing that I think so many denominations and faith communities have been wrestling with for a while. What it's come down for me to really just being the point of clarity is, are there clear, transparent pathways to leadership for everyone? And and if you think about a movie, if we're gonna talk about this in terms of movies, would there be opportunities? Are there opportunities in film for characters who are traditionally marginalized to step into the center of the story and not necessarily play, however they've been marginalized, as the main issue of the story, the main, the thing the plot intersects on? But that's a part of who they are, an integral part of who they are, but they have a different story to tell, some other story that isn't necessarily, the traditional story of the tragic gay man, or or a person of color pulling themselves out of poverty, or whatever it might be, kind of a cliched story. So I find in the church, do we offer people the opportunity to be the center of the story, or are we simply using folks as window dressing? Do they not actually see a way that they can become board members and to be up on Sunday mornings as some sort of worship assistant, or however your church might be structured? For me, it's just come down to that. How do we make our pathways to leadership clear and transparent so they are available to everyone?
Ooh, that's a $1 million question right there. And I mean, and I think you're totally right. And I think that is also in part where we see this, why this movie was so groundbreaking and continues to, I think, inspire and be like, okay, like this makes sense. We know about, even though there are, this kind of subplots, right? This story is about Cher per se, but the supporting cast, for lack of a better term, has full, robust live storylines that we know about. They have personalities, they have conflict, and it's not rooted in any sort of one stereotype, but also kind of inclusive of all of it, right? It has a lot to do. One of the big kind of stereotypical tropes is just teenagers, right? This gives depth and nuance to teenagers in a way that we historically, socially have not. And I remember seeing, I think that's why the representation for me, as a very privileged straight white girl, but I was like, oh, there's me on, in a movie with more than just my hair color, or more than just, the things that I am passionate about, like theater or whatnot, but there is nuance there, and there is spaces to grow, and a real lived into understanding of our growing edges, right? I both cringe and love when Cher's like, I can talk my way out of kind of anything, her grades and all of that. And what makes you think you can do that? Because I've done it every other semester, which is a lot of white privilege in there. Just stop like that. But also that she's growing, that she can't do that in her driver's test. And she's like,
yeah, I mean, she's a teenage girl who, when have we seen this in film? A teenage girl who wants to be a better person, like genuinely
right.
is saying out loud, like, how can I be a better person? What can I do? What does that look like? It starts off where you think it's kind of a joke about, a typical teenage girl in Beverly Hills, whatever a typical teenage girl in Beverly, very privileged,
Sure.
verified life. But then, it actually is this journey for her of wanting to be a better person and make a contribution to the world. And I can't think of another movie that predates that, or maybe even since then, where that's, that particular person is represented in that way with that particular stated goal.
Well, and I think, yeah, and we were all talking earlier a little bit about youth ministry and camp and all of that, like meaning like actual church camps. But I wonder what this movie has to say to the church about how we value our young people. And I'm curious about what you see in that as two people, well, three of us that that deeply value and love, have great understandings of what a young person can bring to a community besides just youth and the optics of growth and vision, right? Because I think that that's historically what we wanted, but really when we let them speak, and not just as like a youth Sunday, but let the youth speak for the church and to the church. How do we, how we grow in expansive ways, how we might grow in expansive ways. And so I'm curious, what do you think Clueless has to teach the church in that regard?
So Clueless is considered the best teen movie of all time. Like whenever there's a list of it, it's always in the top 3. And I think it's because it trusts young people to tell their stories. Cher is not given grace to continue in the way that she was. She is given every grace to grow. And naming that need to grow, and it's trusting her with that work that has to be done in community, that I think is what we really, Mel Horowitz is kind of my favorite character in the entire movie because he knows exactly what's going on, and he just does not give a damn for most of it. When he just yells at her, "Get out of my chair!" Like, he's not mad, he's just terrifying. Or he's not angry, he's simply terrifying. He's seeing what's developing between Josh and Cher. Cher wants to help, so he says, "Sure, you can do this part." It's giving room for it. What's the name of the law associate who clearly was going to get fired because he messed up the transcripts, because Cher messed up the transcripts? That scene right there was, she's doing her best, you have to have room for her. And that associate had a point of, no, my ass is fired now because of this. It is not right. And he leaves, and my husband was like, "Oh yeah, no, that guy's totally fired." I'm like, "He's super fired." My 11-year-old daughter was like, "Well, wait, why?" I'm like, "Because Beverly Hills Law. But I'm sorry, was there a cogent point there, or did I just talk for 3 minutes?
No, I mean, I'm just curious about, because I think that there is something to what you named. How do we value stories of young people for the church in a way that we do, in the way that we value the stories of our elders, right? Like the lived experiences and the stories. How can we as faith leaders posture our church in order to receive those stories for communal growth, rather than just look at our young kids doing cool things, aren't they great, your kids are welcome here, but saying, this is the church now, not the church of the future.
Yeah, no, I think is a great question, because in watching the movie, I was thinking about teenage life and how it's this mix of like really profound insights because of what the freshness of their perspective, what that brings, along with these areas where they just don't know yet. They don't know. And I think so often we who are leaders in the church will discount youth because of what they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And we sort of want to put them in a box to say, well, we're gonna give them this, we're gonna have them do that, and then they'll learn XYZ. But the truth is that they've got these profound lessons so often to share with us that we just don't make as much space for, at least in my experience, as we should, to sort of receive that their wisdom, because they do have wisdom. That's the wonderful thing about Cher, is she's just a mess in some ways. There's so many things she doesn't know about, and yet she is so well-intentioned and so ultimately kind-hearted. She's learning what that looks like to really be a compassionate person in the world. And she also just comes out with these gems sometimes that are just right on the mark. Like she actually is seeing right through, some of the stuff that maybe would cloud our ability to see things clearly. So I wish that we could find more ways to create collaborative space to learn from each other a little bit more, rather than seeing it as our job to just create programming for kids or whatever, and send them on a mission trip or whatever it might be, and not really think about the fact that it is a reciprocal relationship that we should be in if we're going to truly be beloved community.
Yeah.
Well, and it's the room, going back to the grades thing. The grades aren't ready yet. What do you mean they're not ready yet? Well, I'm using the tools that you've given me to try to change the way things are.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if part of the reciprocal relationship is giving time and space for young people to do things. Youth Sunday used to stress me out when I was a youth minister, because it was one day and we had to make sure everybody had rehearsed and everybody had their parts written and everything else. And there was no space for like a kid to write a really bad offering message, right? Because if he was doing it for, or she or they or whatever were doing it for 3 months, eventually they'd figure out language and they'd find the tempo and purpose in it. So
well, and I think we see that as well in the conversations that, like, so when Ty gets the whole thing that happens at the mall and she's thrown, Christian comes and saves her, and then her story kind of escalates into, Cher, is it true that she, I don't remember what the line is, but it's like that she was held up and, all of this, and Cher's like, no, like that's not, that's not true. But also maybe it feels true to Ty. Maybe, she's telling that story of like, when when you're almost near death, your life flashes before your eyes, and she's just telling this story, and she needs to push those boundaries in order to rein herself in and figure out who she is, because that's in that space for Ty, in which she is being pulled by her peers and by everyone in lots of different directions, that of course her story is going to expand, because no one has ever said who you are is good and perfect and and accepted. It's always, you need to be something a little bit more extra, right? Even Cher at the beginning is well intentioned, but it's like, love a makeover, let's make her over, like where she is at is not okay for our school or our clique or or our group of friends. Let's turn her into something else. And I think part of that goes back to us saying in the church, well, how often are we saying, your brokenness, your beauty, your gifts are all a part of you. And while we are all called to grow, who you are as, created and beloved is good and enough.
Mm-hmm.
for leadership, for wherever God is calling you. And, you know, it's one of those things, how do we not be share and say, I don't know, well, when I had a gun pointed to my head, you know, like, which is clearly way more of a initial and like imperative threat to her life than what was happening, doesn't mean that both of them didn't feel the same way of, I feel threatened, I was you know, I was harmed, I was hurt in this way. The church both has the knife and throws you overboard, and it's just a matter of where you know, end up, if how you have in part been hurt and or been reconciled into the community.
Yeah, that's some great points. And I was just thinking as you were talking, you know, here's a story we're talking about that Jane Austen wrote in the Regency period, you know, about an English village. And what I noticed in rewatching it is it's all there, you know, everything from Emma is there, just translated to this high school, you know, 200 years later, whatever it is. And not quite that long, but and it's so universal, really. And I think it's something we've been wrestling with clearly for quite a long time. You know, how do we make a space for people to be who they are and be valued, you know, whether it's young people or whoever it might be. And that's, you know, that was what Emma was wrestling with in the Jane Austen novel. You know, she's trying to make over people so they fit better into her understanding of village dynamics and so on, rather than creating a more expansive space for people to just be who they are. And it just feels like our call in faith communities at this point is, you know, how do we expand our communities in such a way so that people feel welcome to bring their full selves to them, or as you mentioned earlier, Stephanie, to maybe walk away with their full self, where we give them our blessing and say, yes, you know, go experience this other thing, and but please, you know, stay in relationship with us in some way, because we want to continue to know you. You know, I just love the fact that this story has universal themes, and probably in our lifetime we'll see it updated and remade yet again at some point, if it hasn't already. And I'll be very curious to see what it looks like then, you know?
Absolutely. I'm with you. I know we have talked a little bit about everything, as we are wont to do in this show, but we have not talked about one particular person. And so I'm going to just kind of throw it out there, knowing that we've not had any lead into this, but why are we okay with a college kid coming back and dating 15-year-olds and hanging out with young teenagers in this space and naming it as a good, healthy love story that we are rooting for, and with the caveat of, I love Paul Rudd. And in that space, I did not see its you know, its problematic ways, but watching it the other night, I was like, oh, no. Also, why does he want to hang out with high schoolers? And I have so many questions. What do y'all have to say to that?
I had to caveat it in my brain as he probably just, you know what, he's a college freshman and he's 17 years old, and they don't mention it, and that's just the way it worked, and that's why they were.
I had to do the same.
I don't know, because when he sees her, see, this just goes to show my my movie references, because I know a lot of stuff from the golden age of movies. But when Josh sees her coming down the stairs, the music they play is the theme from Gigi, which is the movie about, you know, the very young courtesan to be being groomed for the older guy, which is a really, you know, it's got the Thank Heaven for Little Girls. It's a really creepy movie by today's standards, even though it's, you know, it's just meant to be this frothy French concoction. So the movie has an awareness of that age difference, and yeah, it is problematic by our standards today. That is one of the things I think that probably sets it apart from the way it would be conceived in today's world.
And there's just, oh, sorry,
No, go ahead.
Exactly, because there is such a, the sexism within the ageism, right? That Josh is trusted, and he is, let's say, a freshman in college, 17, 18 years old, but like very much trusted with Mel's $1 million case. Whereas at minimum, let's say Cher is 15, she turns 16 in April, as we know, because she's a little bit older than Ty. And so she's 2 years away from what Josh is, and yet she is treated as a child. Mel engages her and, highlight these things. Here's the June 6th conversations, right? But like even just as they are mere years apart, it's treated as if he is this older man and this younger girl, and they are.
And I don't think there's a good way to spin it. Like, I can't read.
No, I think
it's not an appropriate relationship.
Yeah, it's just, it does go to show you, how we have changed as a culture in this number of years, of what our expectations would be around that, what we would see as an appropriate relationship.
It's the Bible. We hold things in we can love it and hold it in tension with its problematized spaces, and as long as we name them, we can grow together in community.
For sure.
And the age of consent in California is 18.
Oh, it is, yes.
As actually does. Here's a Californian and a raised.
We're California. I'm a New Yorker now, but I was a California then, and so was Jason. So there we go.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I didn't notice it then.
Me neither. Oh, I was head over heels. Find me a Josh. Like, I was very much the high schooler. Like, when I get to college, I'm not going to date high school boys either. I'm, the college boys. And it was like, oh, no. Like, what?
I do want to keep us cognizant of the time and make sure we know what is happening. On 2-on-1, we have a final question.
We do. Jason, thank you so much for coming and being on 2-on-1 and talking Clueless with us. We hope you'll come back and bring some other pop culture space with us as we kind of continue to figure out what God is doing and saying to us in all sorts of spaces of pop culture, but this being one that we all hold so dear. So thank you for coming and being a part of this. Yeah, it's really nice to meet you and to get to spend this time. But as is our tradition, our final question is, what kind of biblical narrative, theme, person, verse are you most reminded of in Clueless?
We didn't really talk about it in depth, but I was thinking about the great female friendships in the Bible, Ruth and Naomi. And it's so lovely to see these friendships, even with the challenges that they had that strong bond. Ultimately, Ty and Cher came back together, and Dion and Cher, and Ty, Dion and Cher. Anyway, so I Ruth and Naomi and their bond is something that was brought to my mind by this story.
I love that. Yeah. Are there?
Okay, so this is outlandish, and I get it. Amber is the Apostle Paul when Cher and Dion and all of them are the church in Jerusalem.
I love that. We didn't talk about Amber, and Amber is one of my very favorite parts.
Amber's my favorite character in all.
You have so many favorite characters.
I do.
That's okay. And you can have multiple favorite. I'm not trying to say you can't.
And also, but Amber, she's tolerated. She is part of the story, but by God, shut up, Amber. So.
And you're naming her Paul. That's a big step for you.
I love Paul.
I know.
I love authentic Paul, appropriately interpreted and given room to be who he is, as opposed to used Paul. Anyways.
Well, it's funny that you say that. So I'm gonna go with Dion and Murray as Paul and Thecla. There is the way in which Murray continues to utilize language within the spaces and cultures that he is in and navigate that for the particular audiences that he has very much reminds me of Paul. And I get like legit vibes of Thecla's own autonomy within that relationship, and yet wanting to come back into relationship again and again with Paul in the ways in which we see Dion and Murray's relationship kind of navigate the ups and downs of their time together.
This question always gets weird, and I love it. Jason, thank you for joining us on 2-on-1. A reminder to those of you listening and watching, we are sponsored by Jeff Wunrow Designs. You can go to Jeff Wunrow, JEFFWUNROW.com. Use the code 2on115 at checkout for 15% off your entire store purchase. We will be back next week because that is something we do. But in the meantime, we're going to avoid any activities that involve balls flying at our face. It kind of ruins our social lives. On behalf of 2-on-1, I am Arthur Stewart.
I'm Reverend Stephanie Kendall.
And And I'm Jason Cook.
All right, we'll see you next time, deuces.
Bye.
Get more 2-on-1 at twoononeproject.com.